Okay, so we're going to take a look at, in terms of positioning, where you should and shouldn't position yourself um, in terms of being trapped by Forest Seed. I think Forest Seed is a spell that's extremely powerful, or tree as people call it. I'll call it tree as well. But it's an extremely powerful spell, and not a spell that a lot of people know how to deal with, right? Um, and to be fair, it's not a spell that people can really deal with. It's just a strong spell. There's very, very little you can do about it once it actually comes out onto the field. You basically always have to spend at least one turn um, to answer any sort of trap set up by the opponent. If they tree, you basically have to spend a turn getting out minimum, right? Now, let's say, for example, one thing to really note when you get treed, and when we talk about all this, we'll pretend that we don't have Arcane Gate, because usually what happens is you get flashed off the first turn, you teleport somewhere, and then they end up treeing you again. So I'm going to flash out of this tree here, and what you're going to see is that apart from the tree itself, there's actually very little surface area around around the tree. Meaning the only way for me to stay trapped in the tree is if an opponent stands right here, which oftentimes you can actually blast from the past them off so they actually fall out and you can get out, or if they summon a minion here. But what's really important about this is that they can't make use of any other terrain to keep you from being trapped, or to keep you trapped. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And we'll look at a few examples first of, let's say, where you shouldn't position yourself. Um, in terms of, let's say, if you don't want to get trapped by Forest Seed, right? So here's an example of where you shouldn't put yourself. Let's say you, for whatever reason, you somehow end up here. Let's say this doesn't exist, but you had the opportunity to teleport here. Should you teleport here? Seems like a very, very safe space. So why not? Well, what happens is if you get treed here, and let's say you flash out of this location, and we'll take a look at a second, right? What ends up happening is that your opponent has a lot more terrain to work with to keep you trapped. Whereas here, they could only block up this location. Here they can block up this location, this location, this location, and anywhere along this long spectrum they can pretty much block up. And, worst comes to worst, they can literally just stand here and you can't get out. And that's not really what you want. We'll reset the map here quickly and look at another few examples of just areas that you shouldn't be. Okay. And we'll look at, so let's say, similar kind of situation, we get flashed off, we get, we come to something like this, and we end up getting treed. And we'll flash out. Right. What you'll notice here, and it's a bit hard to see, so it might not actually be an issue, but sometimes you actually end up getting stuck on this location. We're pretty lucky this time, we got out, but once again, there's a lot more location that your opponent is able to trap you in. And the second thing is you might say, well, being trapped here versus being trapped there, what's really the difference? Well, the thing is that if you're trapped, let's say, here versus inside the tree, and you somehow manage to push your opponent back, they can keep setting up different traps all the way back. So you don't really want to be in a position where you're more trapped when you don't have to be. That's why we always want to plop ourselves in a location where that doesn't happen. Here's a similar example where in this one we might actually end up staying trapped, but we'll see. Right, there's a lot of surface area around this tree. You just don't want that. You just don't want that ever. And we got a really good flash off here, so there's a lot less surface area, but once again, we want to minimize the amount of surface area around the tree as much as possible. Okay. And we'll actually take a look at, there's different ways to use tree on the player. We'll look at how that can impact your positioning as well. So for example, if we put ourselves in this location, you can't actually trap someone with a tree like this. But what you can do is you can do this, right? And when this happens, it's actually a pretty bad trap as well. So let's say we try to flash out this one. It's a pretty awkward flash. You see, you end up flashing, and you're actually still trapped. What's good about being on the right side of the tree versus inside the tree is that you're left with a lot more space to work with. The tree obviously can't be killed, so when you're inside the tree, you actually can't really move, whereas you have a bit more breathing room here. It's still a really bad situation because we literally can't get out without using, Blast from the Past, but yeah, they can still block up the location and everything. So you just don't want to put yourself in a position like this. Okay. We'll reset the map again, go through a few more examples, and then we can look at how we should actually position ourselves. Yeah. Okay. This map is pretty good, I would say. So general consensus or general areas to not be is just try to minimize. Once again, try to minimize the surface area around this map. We'll try to reset it again. Actually, there's some maps where I think, especially when people get flashed off, this is a great example. Okay, when people get flashed off, they try to position themselves in a place that seems really, really safe, so they don't get flashed off again, or they don't get hit again. And obviously that has its benefits, but what often ends up happening instead is you get trapped by a tree in a really, really bad way, and it just messes up your entire game. So here's an example of, people always like to sit themselves on nooks and crannies, and I do this at times as well, but you often shouldn't do this, especially if you know they have tree up, because what happens is, first of all, look at this, there's a huge amount of terrain here, and even if we try to flash out, we literally can't, right? Maybe if we can try a slightly better flash, but even then, doesn't matter how you flash it, there would have been terrain here. And you just can't get out, and it's just bad. It's just such a bad location in terms of positioning. Not to mention, this tree would usually still be alive, so you actually can't summon any minions properly because of the lack of space. It's just a bad time overall. So we just don't, when you can, try to minimize the surface area. Now, where should you actually teleport? I always like to teleport under any tree that looks like this. Right, you'll see this tree, and we'll go through different maps and everything. You'll see this tree all the time. This is, in my opinion, one of the best places to teleport to. Because what happens is they can't actually treat you like this. If they treat you like this, you just walk out. And the only way for them to really cast tree on you is like this. Something like this. And if this happens, oftentimes what people don't know is you can actually walk out. We'll try to do it again. Okay, we can't really get back in, but we'll see if we can teleport back into that little location, but we might be able to. We'll just queue a few times. It's actually very, very difficult okay, so let's see if we can teleport back in that. Okay, we literally can't get back in. So yeah, it's usually the person casting tree might think you're trapped, but you're actually not. And you can actually walk out of that location. And once you're here, you can tower, you can flash, or whatever else it is. It's always it's a very easy break out. We'll look at a few other examples of that. So let's say, we get flashed off and we teleport here. Okay. And make sure you don't put yourself here. The reason why is you can get flashed out of this tree. So always stand yourself up right sort of at this ledge. And once again, they can't trap you here. The best they can do is probably tree like this. You can see this might seem like it's pretty trapped, and that's about as close as we can get it. Sometimes they can't escape, but yeah, oftentimes you can, right? Oftentimes you can actually get out. But look, let's just pretend that we couldn't. Let's just pretend we're still here, and we end up doing a flash to get out. Look at how big this open space is. There is a huge amount of space. The only minion that really blocks up this area is something like a Pegasus, right? Even with a snowman, you don't block up the entire area. If someone were to snowman here, we'll just take a look at what happens. You can actually blast from the past and get out, right? So it's not an efficient trap. You spend one turn to get out of a tree, and usually one turn to get out of a tree is pretty worth it because it's an even trade, and tree's a pretty good spell. So anyway, Pegasus can obviously still trap the player, but Pegasus doesn't come out until turn 3. So if you get flashed off, you get treed, they actually don't have a way to keep you in this location, which is why it's such a good place to be. Now, where else on this map could you sort of teleport to? Let's say, for example, we don't have. We'll reset the map again, actually. So let's say on a map like this, we don't have that tree that I was talking about. So where else can we teleport if we get flashed off? Well, if you get flashed off, I think the one thing that you just want to be aware of is you don't want to get flashed off again, but you want to situate yourself in a location where you minimize the amount of surface area, or minimize the amount of terrain around the tree afterwards. Especially the terrain around sort of the upper part of the tree. Like for example, if we were to come here, right, we don't want to come here because this part might remain after we flash out the tree. Or if we don't want to come here because this part will remain after we flash out the tree. We just don't want that, and that's really problematic. So in terms of this map, the areas where you might minimize surface area is something like this. Let's say we teleport here. Right? There's two ways they can set up that tree. One is they put you inside the tree. If they put you inside the tree, there's immediate space being wasted in the sense that you can actually walk. This location. It's open space. You can walk out to this part of the tree already, which is a really big deal because essentially a tree is less effective because you can get part of yourself out of the tree already. The other way is like this. And what happens is if you do this and you flash out, there's a huge amount of open space. Like all of this is open, and it's like the example we looked at before. There's no way to keep you trapped, right? Let's say they decide to go with this trap. You can directly get out of the outer part of the tree. You do a flash, and there's no way for them to keep you inside this tree, especially when you're out on the sledge, because they can come down, they can fly here to stop you getting out, and then you just blast from the pass and you walk out. Or there's no way they can stand here while summoning a minion where you couldn't just get out. So that's an example of where to be, right? Where else on this map could we sort of go? Let's say we go to... so let's say we go to somewhere like... so we just need to make sure that we're not getting flashed again. So let's say we don't really want to stand in, we already established that being here is bad because of this location here. But that doesn't actually mean that if we stand a little bit further back, such as here, this is bad. This is actually a pretty good location to teleport to. So you should always keep yourself on open ground. Like this is flat ground, right? Don't keep yourself holed up in like nooks and crannies like this, because that's how you end up being trapped more. Because what happens if they trap you here is that, well, there's actually not that much terrain, right? There's only this little part blocking it. If you flash out, it's a fairly decent flash. It's obviously not ideal, not something perfect like this, but you get out in one jump. You get out in one jump. This map is not the greatest, so there's not that many nice places to teleport to. We've kind of exhausted the only one. You can kind of come here, right? Not everyone's able to, you can't really be flashed from this location, but let's say they tree you here. And you flash out. Right, once again, it's fairly decent way out. Okay, so we can try to reset the map. We can look at a few other examples, but basically that's how you should deal with the tree. This is actually a really good location to teleport to. If they trap you here, there's nothing, there's no terrain to keep you from getting out. And if they do this, you're actually pretty set to escape as well. Before I make this flash, just notice how there's this green little brush, and I'm elevated on this brush, which allows me to be on this part, like the middle part of the tower. That's a good place to TP to, whereas this is different, and we can look at that in a second. So anyway, we flash out here, right? And there is so much open space that we're just not going to stay trapped. Okay, good. I said we'll look at this this tower as well. So let's say we come here, right? And they try to trap us like this. If they try to trap us like this, we can actually probably blast from the past this little location, and we can walk out, right? Like this, yeah. And we can walk out because of BFTing this. The other way is if they trap us like this, we can get out with one flash as well. So this is also a pretty good location to be. I think what I see a lot of players do when they're not as familiar with positioning is they'll teleport somewhere like this. You know, right here. And there's this misconception that you need to, like, I think people overcompensate a little bit because they don't want to be flashed again. So they try to stay as far away from the edge and teleport into these seemingly good locations when they're not actually that good. Because if you think about it, being at this very location where we are now is no different from standing here. They're effectively the same thing, because there's no way anyone can flash us off from this location into the water. They're just, you know, it's just a little bit too far. I think it's a little bit too. Maybe it is possible, but I think you get my point in saying there's, you know, sometimes people edge closer to the edge of these trees and terrains when they really don't need to, and by sort of positioning yourself away from the edge, you actually have more open space, which makes it harder for someone to tree you. Let's see if we can come up with another example. Okay. If we take a look around this map, let's see. Okay, so as an example, right? Let's suppose we look at this little location. If you put yourself here, and we'll just take out this sort of right side of the map, pretend that you can't really be flashed. There's no way for someone to flash you from this location off the map this way. It's way too far, it's not going to happen. And instead of positioning yourself here in this cranny itself, which is what I see a lot of people do, and they come here and it looks very safe, and what ends up happening is they might get treed. Oh shit, I didn't actually mean to cast it, but anyway, they get treed. We'll just kill this tree. They get treed in this location, and then or they get minions summoned on top of them, such as Pegasus, to block this area, and it's just not a good time for anyone. Where you could instead go, and just pretend that I didn't completely butcher this terrain, where you could instead go is you could position yourself here, right? You could position yourself here in the middle, where, you know, you can't get flashed off still, and the only way for them to tree you is like this. and there's a lot of open space as soon as you flash out. But anyway, I think I'm giving the same example over and over again. I hope it's helped out in terms of understanding how to position better against forest seed specifically. We'll talk about things like ice shield, minions in another video or in a different section. But yeah, I've noticed that forest seed is something that people struggle with a lot, and I think that just a few simple tips, positioning it like here or in open spaces like this rather than crannies, I think that can go a long way, because sometimes if you do end up getting treed in a bad location, doesn't matter how experienced a player you are, you only have like two options. You can flash out, you can teleport out, you can try to kill the tree. There's very, very limited options, and it doesn't matter if you're a good or bad player. I think what makes a difference is that if you're more experienced in 60G, you know where you can stand or where you can't stand, such that the opponent's tree is not as effective as otherwise would be. I always try to teleport in locations like this, and I'm still sort of even myself, I always get treed, and I'm very subject to the power of the spell, but it makes it so that I can prevent these bad situations from happening more often. So I hope that helped. I'll do a different section on the other stuff as well, and yeah, we'll go from there.